right, it's good to be with you again today. Hope you've had a nice little break since our last lesson. And let's go ahead and get organized for our lesson today. For materials, if you would have on hand activity 4.2, and you can continue filling in that outline during our lesson today. And you'll also find a calculator helpful. On our agenda today, we are going to continue with tertiary industries, and then we'll review that section and talk about the wealth of nations. That's our main topic today, making choices and measuring wealth. We'll have a group activity for you and your family, and then if we have time, you'll be calculating family GDP. Our main idea today, there are two basic economic systems, capitalism and socialism. Also, gross domestic product is the fundamental statistic that measures a nation's wealth. Your goals today are to distinguish between capitalism and socialism, define GDP and per capita GDP, and to calculate any country's per capita GDP. So we have a lot of things to cover today. Let's go ahead and get started with our chapter verse. Go ahead and read with me Genesis 1:27 through 28. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Now, last time our main topic was tertiary industries, and we spent most of our time on infrastructure, and we were on the topic of communicating by electronic media when we ended. So we're going to pick up there, continuing with tertiary industries. Electronic media, just a little review of what we were talking about last time. Telecommunications is sending messages through electronic impulses, and examples are, the three main examples are telephone, radio, and television. And of course you might think of computers. We talk about email or electronic mail, and computers generally nowadays use telephone lines. You'll hear the word modem thrown around a lot, and television cables. They've now come up with cables that are supposed to be a lot faster, getting online and downloading and things like that to transmit their information. So they could probably fall under either category of telephone or television. And then we want to look at some communication statistics quickly in your textbook on page 77. And here you have a list of countries. These are alphabetized. Newspapers, phones, radios, and televisions, and notice that all figures are per 1,000 population. Okay, so we want to use this to answer just a few questions to get you familiar with it. How many phones does Bangladesh have per 1,000 people? And in a town of 1,000 people, how many homes probably have a phone? All right, when we look at our table, keep in mind that this is showing statistics for everyone, including businesses. So Bangladesh, we see that there are 2 phones. How many of them are likely to be in homes? Probably none of them, right? If the total includes businesses, the businesses are the ones that probably own those 2 phones. Okay? Which countries have more radios than people? All right, look at our radios here. And how can you tell? It's all figures per 1,000, so any figure over 1,000 means that it has more radios than people. Australia, Canada is even, and then we have the United Kingdom and the United States, about 2 radios per person. In which 3 areas is the United States the leader? Okay, all you have to do is look across there to the United States and our figures. Here's the United States, 228. You can see that the U Kingdom has more newspapers and others as well. Australia is one of them, and so on. But as long as you see that there's at least one country ahead of us, you know that we're not the leader in newspapers. What about phones? 625, glance up. Yes, leader in phones. We already saw that the United States is the leader in radios, and 835, also the leader in televisions. All right, what countries have more newspapers per 1,000 people than the U.S.? And can you explain why? That one might require a little bit of thinking. Newspapers, okay, we already noticed Australia has more, France has more, Germany has more, Japan has more, Russia has more, and the United Kingdom has more. They all have more newspapers per 1,000 than the United States. Why do you think that might be? Maybe they like to read the newspaper more than we do? No, that's not really it. It's mainly because Americans tend to use more electronic media. People get on the internet and look up the sports scores and the headlines and things like that. They email and use more electronic information instead of reading the newspapers. All right. Now, you've already read the rest of that section, so you've read about the 4 remaining groups of tertiary services. Let's go ahead and quickly cover them. First one is trade. And the terms you need to know about this are wholesale business. These are businesses that buy in large quantities and then they sell in smaller quantities to other businesses. So they're not selling directly to the consumers. Retail is selling directly to the customer. So they would most likely buy something from a wholesale business and then they turn around and sell that again directly to the customer. And then finance is another category that you read about, and that includes banks, insurance companies, investment firms. Those are some examples of financial industries. And the World Almanac includes a list of the top banks in the world. What nation do you think is at the top of the list? Well, if you said the United States, you missed the mark on that one. The largest United States bank, which is Chase Manhattan, isn't even in the top 10 banks of the world. 7 of the top 10 banks are located in Japan, and the other 3 that make up the top 10 are in Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. General services is another type of tertiary industry. It includes support services such as repair, health services, and also services that just help keep up people's morale and help keep people happy. And you already read about several of the examples. Maids. If I had a maid, I'm sure that would help me be happy. That's what people think. You can't really buy happiness, but occasionally when you wake up and see a messy house, you think, boy, it'd be great to have a maid just come in here and clean this all up. But we have the auto mechanics as an example of someone in the repair industry. A nurse or a doctor would be in the health industry. What about someone like a zookeeper or amusement park worker? They were listed in your textbook. Probably morale, maybe health. Take a little break, instead of working all of the time. And of course the Bible does teach us that we need at least one day a week to rest and to do some activity other than our normal everyday work. General services is actually one category out of 2 that outnumber our next category. General services and trade are the only 2 categories of our industries that outnumber the number of workers in government in the United States. And for government workers, we have policemen, soldiers, lawmakers, judges, bureaucrats, and by that we just mean government officials who carry out the laws. You may hear that used negatively, but those are people that are workers. They're working to carry the laws out. Some statisticians also recognize 2 other types of industry. These were not in your textbook to read about, but we had primary, that's for first, secondary, second, right? Tertiary comes from the word for 3. Then we have quaternary for the word for 4. Think of a quad or quarter. And then we have quinary from the word for 5. Quaternary and quinary services, and those include information research and management, And then executive decision-making fits in the quinary services. And in this classification system, tertiary services refer primarily to personal and professional services and to retail and wholesale trade. So those two types of trade would fit into tertiary as we studied them. But only the most advanced countries in the world are going to have large sectors in what some statisticians call quaternary and quinary services. And you don't have to worry about learning those, but I thought you might take an interest in that. Now, we are going to take a moment to review tertiary services. So, if the statement that you see is incorrect, change the underlined word to make the statement correct. Okay, so you're changing the underlined word to make a correct statement if necessary. Services are intangible products. Correct. Goods are tangible products. Correct. Teaching is an example of a tertiary service. Correct. Auto repair is an example of a secondary service. That is incorrect. It's an example of a tertiary service. Infrastructure is the basic energy and money needs for all industries. Incorrect. Remember we talked about the two E's, energy and equipment. Transportation is a type of infrastructure. Correct. Few workers in advanced countries work in tertiary industries. That is incorrect. In advanced countries, most workers actually work in tertiary industries. Communication is measured in kilowatt hours. Incorrect. That is the measurement for electricity. Water and sunlight are non-renewable resources. Incorrect. They are renewable resources. And finally, retail businesses sell goods directly to the consumers. And that is correct. All right, so I hope you were able to remember what you learned about tertiary services or tertiary industries, service industries. Now to our main topic of the day, the wealth of nations. Now God has provided mankind with a variety of resources that he can use to produce wealth. God has given every individual a unique combination of resources. In fact, every country has a unique combination of resources, and how well each person and country follows God's design influences the wealth they have. Now, I don't want you to feel like if you're doing exactly what God wants you to do that you're always going to be wealthy. We know that Christ wasn't wealthy. He told us that he didn't have a place to rest his head. And we know that God wants us to be hard workers, but he doesn't sanction workaholics who miss worship in order to take advantage of business opportunities. In Exodus 34:21, he says, 6 days thou shalt work, but on the seventh day thou shalt rest. In earing time and in harvest thou shalt rest. And earing time was just their plowing time. So if it was time to plow, they still needed to rest. If the crops were ready to harvest, they still needed to have a day to rest. And God told his people to observe the Sabbath even when the wheat was ready to be harvested and the weather was good. So he didn't want them to say, oh, it's a great day, we really need to take advantage and get all of our crops in. He said, you need to rest. And God gave men resources to serve others, not to serve ourselves. And wealthy countries need to learn that true riches are not earthly, but heavenly. And extreme wealth can be just as dangerous as extreme poverty. In Proverbs 30, verses 8 and 9, we read, "Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient with me, lest I be full and deny thee and say, Who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain." So this man realized that there is a danger if you're wealthy to say, oh, I got all this myself, and, who needs the Lord? So there can be a danger either way. But when wealthy businessmen use advertisements that appeal to greed and the flesh, which is done often these days, they're actually perverting God's dominion mandate. What we want to talk about next is two basic systems of economics, and they differ. Part of their differences is in who makes the economic choices. The basic systems are capitalism and socialism, and we're going to begin with capitalism, and it gets its name from capital, which is money to build industries. Capital includes raw materials, workers or labor, and the buildings and equipment necessary to run a business. Also, in capitalism, private individuals or corporations build most industries. There's little interference from the government, and there's a free market competition. Entrepreneurs are risk takers who start businesses, and it's also a phrase meaning captains of industry. Now, in capitalism, remember, it's the private citizens who own most of the businesses. There's little interference from the government. They're able to sell their items freely, and competition determines who does the better job. If you have the better product, more people buy your product. So who is making most of the choices in capitalism? It's the citizens, isn't it, who own the businesses. And in Proverbs 22:29 you read, "Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men." And again, we see that the scriptures encourage us to be diligent and to work hard. And God's principle is to reward hard work, but we have to remember that we won't necessarily see all those rewards immediately. And they're not even necessarily going to be material rewards, as is sometimes taught today. Sometimes it's reward enough to know that you've done your best job. I was just thinking of some yard work that my husband and I did last weekend. No one came out and paid us or patted us on the back, but we just thought, oh, doesn't our yard look good now? And it's just, the satisfaction of knowing that you have done your job and that you've done it well. And Christians need to be known for being diligent workers, men who are diligent. Now, capitalists, however, are sometimes known for their greed, and it's sometimes capitalist is used as a derogatory term. And socialism was developed as an opponent to capitalism, or as an alternative, I guess we could say, to capitalism. In socialism, the government owns most industries, and instead of a free market, they have a command economy. This is where the government determines where industries are built, and the government determines what the industries should produce. So it's a command economy. And socialism is really the idea of redistributed wealth. This idea that there's only so much to go around, and we're going to take some from you and give it to these people. So who is making most of the choices in socialism? It's not the people, it's not the private citizens, it's the government. And philosopher Karl Marx took socialism to its extreme and became known as the father of communism. And for our purposes, you can just remember that communism is the most extreme form of socialism. And in communism, the idea is for the government to own everything. The government owns everything. or that's the idea that they're heading toward. Now I'm going to give you a little quiz over what we've studied in the previous sections, and you'll need to have all available members of your family with you to take the quiz for this illustration. So you want to go ahead and gather as many of your family members together as possible. Everyone needs a pencil and a sheet of paper numbered to 10. Okay, I'm glad that you're able to join us. We're just going to take a brief quiz, 10 questions, and they're all multiple choice to make it a little easier on you. This passage reveals the dominion mandate. A, Genesis 1:27, 28 and 28. B, Job 28:1 and 2. Or C, Proverbs 22:29. The Maasai of East Africa and the Huns of Central Asia illustrate A, commercial farmers, B, nomadic herding, C, subsistence farming. Which is a non-metal mineral? A, gold, B, lead, C, uranium. Number 4, the world's most important alloy is A, brass, B, bronze, C, steel. Number 5, which of these is a fossil fuel? A, platinum, B, petroleum, C, potassium. Number 6, most of the world's electricity is produced by A, coal, B, petroleum, C, natural gas. Number 7, which industries take raw materials and change them into a useful form? A, primary, B, secondary, or C, tertiary. Number 8, the Industrial Revolution took place in A, Belgium, B, Berlin, C, Britain. Number 9, plastic dyes and synthetic rubber are examples of A, the technological revolution, B, petrochemicals, or C, durable manufacturing. And our last one. This quiz was A, easy, B, challenging, C, very difficult. Okay, now you want to quickly grade the quiz and be sure to assist any of your family members that might need help. And we'll start with number 1, A is the correct answer. Number 2, B is the correct answer. Number 3, C is the correct answer. Number 4, C is correct. Number 5, B. Number 6, A. Number 7, B. Number 8, C. Number 9, B. And number 10, any of those could be correct depending on whether or not you have studied the material in the past or not. Now, you're going to need to mark your percentage on this quiz, but your grades are going to be determined on economic systems. So at the top of your quiz, mark your percent. It's out of 10, so that should be easy to figure. And then write capitalist, socialist, and communist. Make yourself a little mark so you can write your grade down based on each system. Now, for your capitalist grade, here is the grading scale. Find your number there. Write down your letter grade or your number and letter grade. Okay, now for a socialist score, you might need to do a little bit of addition before you can figure your score. What you want to do is add depending on your score. So here's the chart. If you made 90 to 100, add 0, 80 to 89, add 2, 70 to 79, add 5, 60 to 69, add 10 points to your score, and 0 to 59, add 15 points to your score, to your percentage. Then, after you have added that, this is your grading scale. Use your new number to find your letter grade in the socialist system. Now, to figure a communist grade, your score has to be averaged with the grades of the rest of your family. So add up everyone's first percentage and divide by the number of family members that took the quiz, and you will all receive the same grade based on this scale. You might need to pause the program to figure up the average. All right, now which score does each person like best? Take a few moments to discuss it as a family. Discuss the outcome of each family member's grade, which are fair, who liked each one, and why. All right, I'm sure that probably made for a lively discussion and helped you to see some of the advantages and disadvantages of the different systems. Now, after several socialistic governments fell in the 80s and 90s, many countries did turn to mixed economies. And mixed economies are just that. They are a mix of capitalism and socialism. They combine elements of both. Private citizens own property and businesses, but the government closely regulates all of the industries. Now, what we need to remember is that every industry or every economic system has its own weaknesses, and the big danger with socialism is that just a few people have most of the power, and it's very easy for them to abuse that power, as was seen in the 20th century when a lot of abusive governments rose, but they also fell quickly. And then the dangers of capitalism are slow in arising, but they're much more deeply rooted, and we talked about a few things earlier, like greed and things like that. But what we need to remember is God's warning to Israel. Remember when Israel asked God for a king like all the nations around them? Samuel warned them about the tendency of all governments to take over property and industry at the expense of personal freedom. And in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 9, this is the Lord speaking to Samuel, and he says, "Howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them." And so Samuel's telling the people, and he said, "This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint him captains." And he goes on to verse 13, "He will take your daughters to be confectionaries, to be cooks, to be bakers." Verse 14, "He will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants." Verse 15, "He will take a tenth of your seed." Verse 16, "He will take your men servants, your maid servants." Verse 17, "He will take a tenth of your sheep," and so on. And he just goes on and on. He's going to take this, he's going to take that, he's going to take the other. And that's the tendency of governments, to take from the people to have for themselves and for the government. But we must also remember that God's ways are not our ways. Think of Joseph. God raised him up to allow Pharaoh to purchase all of his nation's land, and he became an absolute ruler by God's design. And so what does this show us about divine intervention and about God's design for economic systems? What can we learn from that? Well, they vary, don't they? According to the time, the situation, and of course according to his purpose, which is something that we cannot always fully understand. Now our time is up, so we're going to have to end here. Next time we'll get into our gross domestic product and continue talking about the wealth of nations. Now let's go ahead and look at your assignment today. You want to read the pages 78 to 80 and complete the section review on page 80. And then here's the answer to our "Where in the World" question. Where is the world's longest railway? It is in Peru. And tourists take the Central Railway to get to the ruins of Machu Picchu. The railway climbs 15,694 feet in the Galera Tunnel, 108 miles from Lima. Next question. Where can you find the highest wind speeds ever officially recorded?